What are, just to recap, just the structure of this call. First, I'll provide an overview of the use cases, and then we'll move into providing propositions related to each of the use cases. It's quite straightforward because interaction is the name of the game. So, overview of the use cases. We had two sources of use cases. We had the working group, so you through GitHub, through our last calls, some even over email. That resulted in 17 use cases that we posted on GitHub. Actually 18, but we already had a call on one of the use cases and helped that person identify what the needs are. But now, today, 17 of those use cases are in play. But then you may have also been involved in the creation of this report, interviews, or the webinars that were hosted for it. The Commission published the final report on the study supporting the implementation of interoperability assessments in the EU public administration. That's a mouthful, but what it comes down to is that is very interesting to us because it provides some recommendations on how to tackle the assessments. It also contains info about data that's important in those assessments. So we derived 9 use cases that could be relevant to our data model from that report. Here, the QR code is in case you're not aware of the report. You can scan the QR code that will bring you to the page where it's published. Then we've sorted the use cases. So we just added all of the use cases without reassessing them, just the naive way. And that way we also capture any needs that might need to be transferred to other units that could take this into account when implementing things. So we sorted them into 3 buckets. The first bucket is covered. What do we mean with covered? It's not that at this day you can use it that way. What we mean with covered is implementing this data model that already meets the need. Making sure once the data model is present on JoinUp, that would meet a need, or finally, that it's actually already in the data model, like the classic covered. Then out of scope, it's a harsh term, right? But what it in the end means is we cannot handle that fully in the model, but we do have some recommendations on how to approach it. And it's very important to take into account these use cases when implementing them. So it relates to connecting to other systems where we already provide reference to that other system, but we're not going to make the data model for that other system. That's what's considered out of scope. There are 6 use cases, so you think, why did you even write those down? We still think it's important to highlight how to connect those to those other systems and that connection is valuable. And then finally, we have 8 use cases that are to be implemented. So these are the use cases that really require a new addition or change to the model. So let's look at what the model is today. So this is without the additions that we're going to discuss today, because you still have to agree, validate, comment on those. So we didn't update the model with what you have not agreed for yet. So what we see again, we've done this a few times. In the center, we have the binding requirement, which originates from a policy that can be legal documents, legislation, or that can be a procurement document, which is expressed through an FRBR expression. We'll come back on that one today. So that's our source. Then we also have the assessment execution. So that is captured through the assessment class. It is provided by a public organization. It results in a statement on what is the interoperability like. That can all this binding requirement stuff. It can reference interoperability solutions, which falls on the ADMS asset. And binding requirements, assets, and statements can all reference additional documentation, which is captured under both documents. We can also reference data sets and other resources, which we globally captured under the get resource, really at a high level. This allows us implementers to really say, yeah, we are talking about the data service, we are talking about the data sets, standard. That can all be done via the get resource in a more structured manner than you would do through full document. And finally, we've got what's affected, so the public service. So a binding requirement needs to be part of an assessment when it affects a cross-border public service. Therefore, public service needs to be captured. And of course, the participation. Participation is a vague clause that's intentional because there are two code lists in there that define how do you participate. Are you an implementer? Are you a provider of the requirement? Or are you a stakeholder that will be affected by the public service? That all goes through the participation and flow agent structure. That's the Sparks note of the model as is. And then these are the covered use cases, part one, because we have 2 slides for those. So we had use cases around the best practice example repository, the automatic submission of a unified lawmaking process, sharing assessments from national portals over API to other portals and aggregators such as the Interoperable Europe portal, the automatically publishing of these assessments, how to get analytics on the interoperability within EU member states, or deriving that info from the publicly available assessments, then utilizing the assessment report repository, so that's just accessing it and doing stuff with it. It's at the basis of all the other ones. But then also, this assessment is published on the portal. I want to be able to provide my feedback. That allows us to improve based not only on what we internally see, but what we see with other people. So that's really knowledge sharing. And here, these all are covered once this model is implemented in the portal. What do I mean by this? The implementation in portal, the portal will act as the repository. It will be the one also providing an API to access this data or upload your data. So those are the automatic, the machine readable sharing of these assets. But for example, the automatic publishing of the IOPA assessment, we will not provide that. JoinUp will not provide that. What we will have is a data model supporting an API, which can then be accessed by your automatic system, who's also using the same data model. So there is still some work for you on that end. And after this webinar, during our review period that's coming up, we will, on the GitHub issues, specify this and this is explicitly covered in the model. This and this is covered by having it implemented on the portal and the API. These aspects are for you to take up and move on with it. So yeah, what we found important about these use cases, they need to be taken into account when we're doing those implementations, because now conceptually it is covered, but we need to make sure that the implementation actually covers it. So a point of attention from our side is all these use cases and insights we're gathering will be transferred to the portal team, so they are fully aware of what's going on and don't have to start from scratch on the needs gathering exercise. Then we've got the second batch. These are the things that are covered in the model. So the first one is a use case we want there to be a data model. So yes, by default, that one will be covered once we're done here. That's very nice. We also have a strong interest in reusing existing vocabularies. This one is a highlight to us because that means any other semantic change we do, we're not going to start from scratch. That's you saying, take a look at what exists, make sure you use things that exist before trying to reinvent the wheel. That's already an approach we always take, but it's good to see that the community agrees on it. Then the next one is there needs to be a data model. It needs to be objective. There, yes, that's covered. You can be objective within the data model. Of course, it really depends on who's filling in the assessment. So this will also depend on who is implementing your interface. So what are the restrictions in the interface that you're using to ingest data? That is then up to you. This is very important to take into account. It's allowed by the data model, but it always depends what is the quality of data that you're putting in. Then next up, we want to monitor the usage of interoperability assessment reports. How is that monitored? By them being published according to the data model. Very important here is it needs to be published. It cannot be stored locally or within your administration. The Interoperable Europe Act really mandates you have to publish it. And if you publish it in a with unique identifiers, what is the recommendation of this model, that will allow everybody else to ingest it, work with it, link to it, and then we can monitor stuff. And then the last one is the better links to concrete stakeholders and identifier systems. This is covered by the model. That was the agent participation aspect I just explained in the model. But the fact that this use case pops up means it's not clear enough. So what we will do is we'll clarify how to actually use it, how to use it for different stakeholders. Now I have a call to action from you to either tell us now during the meeting or post on the GitHub issue. Who do you see as a relevant stakeholder? Like, what is the story behind it? Who needs to be addressed? Because I have some understanding that relates to what's in the legislation. I also, as a citizen, know what happens when I interact with a public service, but maybe there are some things that are not captured by those pieces of knowledge that you as a domain expert can provide us. I think this is valuable because it looks straightforward. Who is a stakeholder? But if you start thinking about it, more people get involved than you would think. And that's really where you come into play as an expert for your member state and for your institution. You see what is important and who's involved. So if you already think of something, speak up, raise your hand, put it in the chat, put it on GitHub. Just your info is required. And then I here have some points of attention as well. They are not always straightforward. That's why there's a use case. And that means there's a need for explanation, such as with the last one. And we always have to keep this in the back of our mind when we add new stuff. These are issues people see. These are use cases that are important. They should also be covered with any additions we do in the future. So that really relates to number 15, reuse is important. So if I'll go back for the two covered use case segments, are there already any questions or things you're like, I don't actually think it's covered. I would like us to have a second look at one of those issues. Please feel free to put it in the chat. I cannot see the chat right now. I have some rendering issues on my end, so I'll trust on Sander for it.
It looks fine. No questions so far.
Okay. Really don't hesitate. We have enough time today.
Yep.
This call is longer than the last one. My apologies that the last one went over time, but we took it into account for this one, so don't worry about that aspect. Then we move into the next section, which is out-of-scope elements. Out-of-scope elements, I think them even more important as covered, because this really means there is an interaction with some other system. There is a need that goes beyond just this model and just beyond the portal implementation, which we're quite connected to. So first of all, it's linking interoperability assessment with public service feedback. So what it entails, this use case, it's more complex than feedback on the assessment. What we really want to capture here is I, as a citizen or a business or any kind of user of a public service, I have feedback to give. Something is not good. Or I'm a provider and I'm trying to say higher up, there is an issue here. Okay, those issues, they can be really related to a specific implementation, or actually they could be related to a binding requirements we introduced in the past, for example. And some restriction that is on the surface that actually is not improving the user experience. So there is some relevance to the assessments. You would want to link those elements. Currently, how we would propose to approach it, because that's really a separate system. It's not directly related to assessment, this feedback. but it is related to another action we are doing within semantics, and that is the catalog of service action. The catalog of service action, I don't know whether you know it or not, it is really member states or sub areas within the member states to make a base registry that contains a description of all the public services they provide. What's the advantage of having this kind of catalog of services? Everything has a unique identifier. When you use that within your member states, there is like knowledge, this is the source of truth, that is the actual explanation. So if feedback is attached to that catalog of services, I give feedback on this service, it connects to the catalog, then we can connect it to the model, because catalog of services are supposed to be, or our recommendation is to build those on CPS-VAP. And now let CPS-VAP be the provider of one of the classes that we use, which is the core vocabulary public service. And this class, it is supposed to carry the same unique identifier as is present in your catalog of service. So what is the point of attention here is, when providing your assessments, do not go out and invent new identifiers for public services. No, point towards your catalog of service. This will allow the assessments to be connected to all your other actions around that public service. And this allows us to create a more integrated and interoperable system where feedback can move in all directions, and you can get a full landscape overview without having to do an extra mapping exercise. If you're going to create a public service uniquely for your assessments with a unique identifier, and they're not explicitly connected to your catalog of service, you're using some valuable information, some data flows that can give you some insights on improving your service or improving your policies. It can also help you identify core barriers that you did not envisage beforehand. So that's a very important message. If you have a catalog of service action within your country, this is a key player in providing your interoperability assessments. Then we have the next two issues. They are closely related to each other, and they come from the report that was mentioned before. And so how higher the number, the more likely it is that it comes from the reports, because I added those use cases later. So what is proposed in the report is that we expand the catalog of service actions slightly by adding properties that indicate the cross-borderness of a public service. So you have to perform an interoperability assessment on public services, on binding requirements which affect cross-border public services. Now, what was identified in this report is that a lot of member states are struggling. What is a cross-border public service? And a risk identified in the report is, if you have to do this every time, assess whether a public service is a cross-border public service, you're duplicating a lot of work, because probably somebody else made some legislation also touching on this public service. So what they wanted is, let's add a property to our catalog of services that indicates when a public service is cross-border. It will take the form of a code list which says it is, it isn't, it has not been assessed yet. What does this allow? If we would just put it a Boolean, you would say, it is one, it isn't one. And that is good once everybody has looked at all the public services. But we want to allow it to be gradually added to the catalog of services so that it doesn't become a big burden at the start. So this means they will all start with the value not assessed. And once it is assessed, you can say, yes, this one is cross-border. No, this one isn't. There's a lot of valuable information, in my opinion, because next time you're creating some new legislation, you introduce a binding requirement, you can just go look at the catalog, and if it says, yes, it is one, you can say, oh, hey, let's go, let's make this assessment. If it says it isn't one, you can stop there. You don't have to analyze yourself anymore whether this is a public service. So that's comes from the report, is a recommendation. It is relevant to us because we need to make sure that the changes to the catalog are also present in our model. But good news, later this month on the 17th, we have a webinar on CPS-VAP. So that will result into an update of that data model. And this is one of the issues we're going to introduce there. And gonna push the community to adopt. So we're already seeing some synergies with other SEMIC actions. That's lovely, and that also touches back on the use case we had earlier, reuse vocabularies. So with this action, we're improving both catalog of services and interoperability assessments. Before I proceed, any questions? Or if you don't really know catalog of service, you need a bit more information, that is always welcome. Or Sander, if you have any clarifying statements that you think, Emil, you missed this very important bit.
No, yes, I think the most important part here is that we won't establish an extra registry of public service descriptions. I mean, let's just point to the existing data that already is captured in CPSVAP. So I mean, everybody's already doing that anyway. So we don't want to pull things into scope of the model that can already sufficiently be solved with the existing things in place. So yeah, that's it, I suppose. I mean, that for me kind of wraps up this part. I mean, I think that's the main message on the catalog of services.
Just quick addition, if you really still have questions on how the catalog of service shapes out in your country, my advice would be reach out to the team that is responsible for SDG OOTS, because they also have to rely heavily on the system to make the connection with other member states, and they will already have the expertise that you're looking for to do this type of connections. Then we have the remaining out of scope that is not related to the catalog of services. So these are all separate. I'll go over them. First use case was on, we need an assessment to help the searchability on the Interoperable Europe portal. So what is important here is all the data model aspects that we're discussing today, they need to be implemented in such a manner that the portal users or your local portal implementers can use that to filter on searches. It's all nice to provide this information, but if you don't expose it in such a way that it improves searchability, it might get lost. So this is an important flag that we're moving with this model to all the users. Take this into account. We are providing valuable information. Let's also optimally use it. Then we had an issue. It's a bit more complex. It doesn't really explain fully in the title, but data model allows for reuse of domestic assessment data. What was flagged in 9 is really within a member state, it's quite hard to know when is something cross-border. And a risk identified in this issue comes back also to what is in the report, that member states, providers of assessments, people who introduce legislation, they might quite quickly say, yeah, but this public service, it's only for my citizens, it's not cross-border. You might be thinking of the example that is used within the Commission, which is the provision of a disability card. You might think, yeah, but I'm just providing a disability card to my citizen. Yeah, but now we are looking into legislation to make a disability card that counts across Europe. So that means that, okay, you're providing this card to your citizens, but that does affect other parties involved. So, for example, this would count as cross-border public service. You would just not think that it would at first glance. So these are the risks identified in this issue. And we already addressed part of it in our previous slide on the catalog of services. But in addition, the report, it is not meant for us. It was meant for other people as well. We take info from it, and there are some other teams who are taking info from it. And one of the teams is making is advised to, recommended to, by the report to make a pre-assessment. And this pre-assessment, it really focuses on identifying public services as being cross-border. We only facilitate it by then saying, let's mark it so everybody knows it. And then the last issue is to have a centralized repository of binding requirements. So what we had before, we were talking about repositories of assessment. If we want to do that for binding requirements, going beyond the assessment report, that is quite a difficult question to handle. It's a bit too advanced to include within our model. We do keep our eyes out if a team proceeds with this, because what is required then is we need unique identifiers managed by an authoritative source on binding requirements. What is already out there for many of you is when you use ELI, is you have unique identifiers for legislation and bits of your legislation, but it's not marked as a binding requirement. There's nobody managing the binding requirements unique identifiers, and there's also nobody out there. Well, currently there is no way of really making sure that what is the meaning of this binding requirement, what do you have to do, is the same as what somebody else is saying, because that would require you to do translation, but also like what is intended. And this is not part of scope here, but we are aware of some teams within the Commission that are looking at AI solutions to derive a common meaning from requirements from legal texts. Some internal actions are working on this, but it's not within the scope of this particular model. And then, of course, creating a repository on top of that kind of data structure, yeah, that's also not within our scope, but we do want to mention it here so that everyone is aware that this is a need. If you ever see a project that touches on this and you think, oh, there's a strong connection, make sure, like, post it on this issue on GitHub, share it with our team, share it with the other parts of our community here, because we all would benefit from having this exist. So those were the ones that will not affect the model significantly. What do I mean with significantly? We do have to add here some properties coming from the catalog of services once they are adopting it. Otherwise, the model stays the same after these issues. Before I proceed to the ones that will introduce changes to our data model, are there already any questions or remarks coming up, or projects that you see going on at EU level or national level that would make those connections easier that we mentioned before? Okay. I, for now, don't see anything coming in. Don't hesitate if I move on to still come back on this point. I might understand it's a lot of information coming on you now. By the time you're like, yes, I see the connection, we might have moved on in the webinar. It's no issue. Huh? Just post it in the chat or raise your hand. We'll just circle back. As I mentioned before, today we have enough time. We're ahead of schedule by a lot already. So really, it's no worries to say, can you please explain this again? Or can we please dive into this issue again? We have time. Sander, if anything comes up, you flag it, right?
Well, I think it. What I wanted to ask at this point is maybe after the webinar, I would invite people to have a critical look at the model and try to see how it fits on their situation, how it would, if they would instantiate the model, if the use cases that they have in mind, if it really fits, if it's sufficiently expressive, just to kind of get a feeling for does the shape of the model really fit how I want to express things? Because any model is always somehow it's a model. It's not the reality. It captures some aspects of reality, but it's always somehow an abstraction of things. So the question is it sufficiently rich to express what you want to do with it in your local context? And yeah, so just have a look and play around with it a bit, I would say, and then if something still arises from this exercise, also create an issue and let us know if something is missing.
I might realize for some of you, you don't have a GitHub account. If you're willing to make one, it's free. You can just do it. It will be useful for other stuff. I promise you. If you really don't feel comfortable making it, you're also always welcome to send us an email. Don't hesitate. That channel also still exists. I now do see that some hands are raised, so please, Isa, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted maybe I wanted to encourage also people to look into maybe how they would, what kind of data they already have that goes into that could fit one of the categories. Because I think it's important when you think about implementing the assessment in your contexts, in your national context, that you can really, I mean, it's really in the act also mentioned several times, you should build on existing processes, you should reuse existing data. This is not to create more burden, but if you feel that you have a process in your member states that already goes in this direction of an assessment, even if it's an IT assessment or in the regulatory cycle impact assessment, where you're already extracting certain types of data. I think for us, it would also just be interesting if you send us your practices, because then we could map and see, would it fit? If you cannot access it if you cannot assess it yourself with the model because it's too abstract, if you send it to us, I think it can help us also to have a look and say, this could fit, this could not fit, or this could be a best practice. And don't be afraid to send it, because it's not that we now assess if it's lawful or not. For us, it's really now to collect good, different ideas on how to do this and how to do this in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Thank you very much, Isa. That's indeed very important. Context matters. But I also see a second hand raised. Gerard, please take the floor.
Yes, thanks for giving me the floor. Good morning to everybody. I must admit that I haven't had the time to analyze in any deep way what is proposed, but I have more a general question to really understand what we want to do here and how this is supposed to work, because I must admit that's not 100% clear for me. So I guess we want to use this model for creating some structured open data file that would contain the data of an interoperability assessment. But if that is the aim, would it then not be important that we first have a very clear view of how an interoperability assessment is done and what are the precise different questions that would be asked and what we would exactly evaluate, and then create a model based on this? And I don't have the impression that we have the necessary maturity for the moment to know exactly what we would ask in an interoperability assessment and how this would be done in a precise, clear, reliable manner. So it is then difficult to give feedback on a data model that should be the consequence of the functional needs, the requirements, how we want to do the assessment. And another question I'm asking myself, instead of asking member states to try to implement such a model on national level, would it not be far more productive to create a central website that could be used for doing these interoperability assessments that would by default integrate the elements of the data model that would by default create an open data file that member states could then reuse simply on their site, instead of asking them to do it more than 27 times and try to provide it to the Commission. I would say the approach of having one central solution that you can reuse for creating open data reusable assessments, and that the member states could also reuse, seems to be quite far more productive. Yeah, thanks.
I'll invite Isa to comment on the first part of the question, and then after I'll answer the last part on the centralized solution to that the centralized platform. But first, I'd like Isa to answer the first part.
Yeah, thank you, Sander, and thank you, Gerard. I think what we need to keep in mind that this is not a model for the assessment process. The assessment processes will be very different and across different how member states will do it, and also depending on how high level the requirements are. And I mean, there will be different processes, and the Act is agnostic about the process, so we cannot prescribe a process. This model is on the report of the interoperability assessments, and for the report there are certain things that are mandatory to have in a report because of the annex to the Interoperable Europe Act. And I think like most of these data fields are really linked to things that are specifically in the annex. What I think why we opened the discussion now on why we don't, and there is of course already the form on the webpage that just has these fields of the annex, but I'm really very much with you, Gerard. It doesn't help you a lot in the process if you just have to fill out the data fields. And this model, if we describe the content of a data field in a certain way, maybe it can then also help you with the process in the back end. I don't know, maybe this was a bit complicated. So I don't want to say that the question is not relevant. It's a relevant question, but we have to start somewhere. And for me, the starting point is the annex to the Act. And then I hand over to Sander because he wanted to answer on the second part.
Yes. Well, first on the data model part, going into the actual assessment, we don't specify like what Isa said on we don't specify the assessment itself in the model in detail because it's more on the reporting part. But if there is a hint by reusing the core assessment vocabulary assessment class here, there is already a bit of a hint if you want to take a more structured approach in the assessments themselves to reuse the core assessment vocabulary to give structure to the actual assessment part. But because of the scope of the Act, we don't want to over specify it in there. And then of course on the portal, and I'll put the link in the chat in a second. There is a centralized platform. So if you don't want to use the data model in a standalone system and use the API that is still to be developed, there will be the form on the Interoperable Europe portal to also submit interoperability assessments through the website over there. So that solution is definitely going to be, it is already in place. You can already submit assessments through the portal.
What do you mean by submit assessments? You mean that via an API we would have to submit but then we still have to implement the solution on our side.
Either you use the Interoperable Europe portal and you submit them through the website. So there you can just fill out the form and submit an assessment. Then that's the most user-friendly solution in the sense that you don't have to implement anything on your own. Or for those member states that have their own national portal and they want to specialize assessments to their local context and provide more a richer model and capture other aspects as well, we will also offer the API to have an automatic submission just for the yep.
It's like it works now. You can then get a file that you can reuse on your site, or if you're doing it on the Interoperability portal.
Currently, sorry, Sander. Yeah, so currently not yet. So
Okay.
currently you submit it on the portal and it lives on the portal, but within this work stream is the intention to make it into something that can then become a reusable file on your end.
Okay.
So once we have this model in place, the data will be structured and can then live in the structured and linked manner on the portal, but you can also pull it back down for use within your member state again.
And coming back to the first part of your answer to my question, yeah, do I understand you correctly that you consider that people would then have to do on first an interoperability assessment, and then they would have to do a certain process independent of the first one, where they would then make the report, or what you are calling the interoperability assessment report. So that would basically mean that they would have to do the work twice and probably copy or make copy paste, or I don't know, from one to another. Is that how you see the things, or
it depends. I mean, I don't think copy pasting is the objective. Of course the assessment itself can be contextualized, so we cannot really decide on the granularity that you want to have in the assessment itself. But for the if that's why we also want to offer the API so that if you have a local, I mean, if you have a national system or a regional system that captures the assessments, or that provides a workflow to create the assessments, then the reporting can all be automated and be part of that process. But of course, the form on the portal is just a way to classify however you captured your assessment. Here is the reporting part on it, and it captures the metadata elements required to be able to distinguish between the reports.
Yeah. Must say it's not 100% clear for me how this is supposed to work for me. For me, the reporting was always supposed to be an automatic result of the assessment, so not something separate, but just the automatic result of an assessment. So I don't see how you can separate this really from the assessment itself. But yeah.
Can I answer also on this? I see the tool as it stands today, which is, I mean, it's the first starting point, but that you could start doing the assessment even in the tool by trying to fill out the report. Then you can have a draft report, and it has in this repository on the page of you have with I think you can see the draft status of your report, and then it's like it's a mandatory part of the assessment anyways to do a stakeholder consultation. So once you have identified these are the relevant stakeholders that will need to implement these binding requirements that I'm supposed to set, you would need to ask stakeholders anyways, and then this output will most probably have some do something with your results. So you can start the process for it stands today. It's not a perfect tool, but that's why we are here to collect input, and we are collecting it here, of course, from the perspective of seeing it as a data model. But you could start the process already today in the tool, then use the draft version for a stakeholder consultation, for a consultation of other department, whatever. and then you can change whatever you have in the form, and then you can submit once you think that all input is in. So yes, it's just a starting point, but that's really why we are here today, to try to, and today and in all the other fora that we had with the NTT study also, and with the tools that will still be developed and plugged into the starting point of today, also when it comes more towards, and that's where I hear you, the assessment on these cross-border interoperability aspects. There we will be working also over the next months on more specific things, but here we wanted to concentrate already on what can we do good or bad when it really comes to the description of the concrete fields on the assessment that has to be in the report and the output, and how can we have an output that then is reusable and useful for others also, for that will need to implement it. So what kind of information does it need to contain? I think there are a lot of interesting, I know that there is a lot of many open questions also linked to all other aspects, but getting the data model right is, I think, a very important piece of the overall puzzle.
I hope, Gerard, these pieces of information provide a start to the answer for the concerns you're having. Probably they don't answer everything yet. I currently don't have access to the chat, so I cannot share the link, but I shared it with Sander. We have a whole Interoperable Europe page around the assessments, and I hope that can be a spot for you to get a bit more insights on the things where you have questions about. What is hosted on there includes, but is not limited to, the report mentioned before, but also the guidelines. So the interoperability assessment guidelines, they will help you hopefully apply them to the process that you locally have to do. But it's also on there is what was mentioned before, the form for submission of the interoperability assessments. And I hope you can find more information there. But please, if you still have concerns, also post them on the GitHub as well.
Yeah, I'm aware of the guidelines, but the guidelines are not really describing how you are supposed to do an assessment. They are more or less describing in another way what is already written in the Act, so when you have to do an assessment, in which situations and things like that, but not how you have to make an assessment.
Yeah, indeed, it's still that starting point. That's also why the report that was mentioned before is there. That helps us improve the process and the recommendations we're providing. So yes, the assessments are already needed according to the regulation. But what we as a Commission still want to do is improve the experience for member states. So it's something we'll be continuously working on. This data model is part of it, but it's not everything. There will be, as Isa said, we will look at all the other aspects that still need to cover. That's why it's still important that you spoke up now. But if you want to, please also post it on the GitHub so that we have it somewhere and then we can reference it while we're executing the other actions. Like, did we cover the concerns that were brought up within this work stream within another work stream? Okay. So if there are no other hands raised, I think we can then proceed to the use cases that currently have an impact on what the model is about. And so that's the use cases that are to be. The first use case that we want to address is number 14. Here it was really seen, we want to be able to use statistics around the assessments, not assessment one, look at that, analyze it, get an output. No, the intention is really, we want high-level statistics on what is being done, how many are reported, what are the usages. And the need identified by this user that was given in the webinar last time to a post-it was, I need to be able to sort according to country, organizational level, and administrative level. These are all concepts that were not yet in the model. But luckily, what we did have in the model is the reuse of core vocabularies. And more particularly, we're using the public organization class from the core public organization vocabulary. And so it's at the heart of that class. And we were using the minimal required pieces of information. So just the description and the preferred label. What we've done now, what we propose to do now, is to introduce two of the properties that are already in CPOV, but introduce it explicitly within our data model. And that's the classification class, which links to a code list, and spatial, the property, classification property, and the spatial property, which points to a location. First, the classification class, how it is currently in CPOV, the core public organization vocabulary. It is a way to provide a code list connected to a code originating from a code list, and the recommendations within SEMIC are to use one of two or both, because you can assign multiple codes, code lists originating from OP. So we have for that one organization type. This really indicates what kind of organization is it? Is it an agency? Is it a ministry? Is it a department? That information comes from there. It is a code list provided by OP and managed. So why did we take this one? Because OP is considered an authoritative source on this. Also, if a member state wants to indicate, look, you're not capturing all organization types that we have present in our country, there is already a way of submitting an issue and expanding. What we try to do with reusing OP's code list is, one, we don't want to reinvent the wheel and duplicate work within the Commission, because then we're a barrier to interoperability instead of a facilitator. Two, it also spreads the maintenance needs across the Commission. OP is the authority of those kind of code lists, so they are the ones that will also ensure the maintenance of the code lists. That way, it can be tackled separately and also help other actions, instead of only helping us with that particular use case and cannot be reused. That's why we chose, why we recommend to go with OP. Then we also have administrative territorial unit. This one gives you an indication of the admin level. What is the difference between organization type and an admin level? Organization type will give you its ministry, while the administrative territorial unit will tell you we're talking about an organization at municipal level, regional level, sub-regional level, federal level, and national level. These are within the code list adjusted to the member states context. So for Germany, where we have federal state system, it will be different to what we have, for example, in Belgium, where we have also a federal system, but a different one. So this code list is adjusted per member state, and again here, OP is actively maintaining it, meaning that if a country does a change of their organization, administrative systems, it will be incorporated there. And then the last code list mentioned is not actually part of classification, but spatial location. Spatial location is pointing to DCT location. It might not say anything to you, but the intention here is DCT location is a very generic and high level way of describing a location. You can, within that system, use the core location vocabulary also provided by SEMIC, but a more simpler, lightweight option here is to actually point to elements within a code list, such as the administrative territorial unit. What is an administrative territorial unit? It is very simple. It's the instantiation of the code list we have before. So where the territorial unit type will say this is a municipality. The code list administrative territorial unit will say it is this municipality. So hopefully that helps. I did get a notification, so I'm assuming somebody has raised their hand. Gerard, please. To me, you are muted. Is it a me issue or
yeah? Sorry to coming in again to interrupt. Is this aligned, or do you have an intention to align this with other actions going in, or similar actions in this domain, like, for example, what is done in the for the one-zone technical system, where there is also a register of organizations, because that is perhaps not the first thing that we have to do, but I think we really should go in the direction of creating one common register of public sector bodies that can then be used in a different context. So, for example, also in OTS or in EIDAS or other things, and that we should unify these approaches and not have different registers afterwards for different purposes. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, maybe I can quickly respond to this. It's what a bit what we went into when going through the issues at the start of the meeting, that in around everything on when it's about these catalog of service entities, we really don't want to introduce any new data here. We really the approach would really be that you just point to whatever entities already exists in base registries around CPS VIP data. So everything that is already collected in the scope of the SDG. We don't create any new identifiers. Just point to whatever already exists in the base registry of public services, and then we don't duplicate any data.
What do you
that's
mean?
Really the objective here.
What do you mean by pointing to what exists in base registries of? What do you mean exactly?
The CPS VIP data that is already collected in scope of the SDG is already, well, so there are already existing identifiers allocated to things like public service or organization, and there we really would like to reuse as much as possible what is already created there. I mean, if a public service is identified, it has an identifier in the here in the reporting. We just refer to the identifiers of those entities. We will not duplicate the data. In the end, it is all linked data in that sense.
That's why we went here for this structure, reusing the core vocabulary aspects, because as you might know, SEMIC is also involved in OOTS. And one of the things that we're doing in OOTS is making sure that it is compatible with the core public vocabularies, which makes everybody's life easier, because now I can say I within ADA, within interoperability assessments, I use the core vocabularies. I use that structure. Now I am aligned and compatible with all other actions that use the core vocabularies. So that is really also the intention under OOTS. Let's reuse what SEMIC provides at the union level.
But will you point to a specific system, or how will it work precisely on a technical level?
So on a technical level, because I took note now, we will be pointing, the structure will be the same, that's what I mentioned now, but indeed we need to point somewhere. Where is this authoritative list? Currently, I only propose to point to OP, but I was not aware that OOTS was making their own list. So now that's why your input is valuable. I'll add to this list of possible pointing locations, but the OTS is registry, so that that connection is made.
Yeah, I don't think that OTS will cover all the bodies. What I wanted to say in this context that we have in many domains a need for having the data of ministries, administrations, other public sector bodies, and that in general we should think about how to solve this in the future and to have one authoritative source that all the different systems then would reuse.
That's indeed the role OP is supposed to play on these kind of matters within the union. So that's why we're pointing to the union. But as you mentioned, OTS is doing something similar. I need to go in, look into what OTS is doing themselves. What is OTS outsourcing to OP, and how can we solidify the connection? But if we are looking at a high-level strategic overview of the Commission, where multiple actions needed, the intention always is here for OP to be the authoritative source, so that not one action is maintaining everything separately.
Okay, thank you.
Good. I mean, that was very helpful because I was not aware about OTS, so that's an action on our plate to analyze further. And that brings, then we can proceed to the next use case, which introduces a change. And that is, as an implementer, I want to be able to reuse data from applicable assessments. What is very important is applicable assessments created on different levels, and I want to be able to filter on topic and location. So what is envisaged within this issue is when at a municipal level, you need to implement a system, or you have to write a procurement contract, and their binding requirements can be introduced as well. What you would want to do at that stage is, okay, there is work on a higher level that applies here as well. What is relevant to me? What is relevant to the location where I'm at? And what is relevant within the domain? Because if I'm going to filter on what's relevant within my location, I get stuff on all different topics. I want to be talking about the topic within which I am working. So for this, it's a very similar approach as what we've done before, as in the administrative level, etc. We use that thing will also facilitate this thing, because that gives me what is regionally applicable to me. What do we need to add is then topic. How do we introduce topic? There we are lucky that we're also reusing CPSV public service, which in its own full specification, so we're currently using parts of it, but in a full specification, it has a property called thematic area. And this thematic area, it is exactly used to filter public services within a domain. So when I'm talking about things within education, that allows me to flag that on the property thematic area. And if afterwards somebody else needs to do something within education, he doesn't want to get flooded by everything done within another topic, they can filter using that code list. It's very important here that a code list is used, because otherwise, if that's a free text area, somebody writes it with a capital, somebody writes it without a capital, somebody writes it in English, somebody else writes it in French. That wouldn't work. So that's where thematic area comes in. It is defined and made under the core public service vocabulary, and it really carries that code list so that everything can be really done into different slots. Now you might think, yes, but my topic, it's actually multiple topics. And that's no issue. That's why, if you can see down here, the cardinality 0 star. Your piece of legislation, your public service, and your solution, they can apply in multiple domains at the same time. And therefore, you can also indicate multiple thematic areas. I don't know whether there are questions around this one. I will just proceed, but raise your hands, speak up if you want to stop me. Then we identified 3 use cases that all touch on the European Interoperability Framework and the European Interoperability Reference Architecture. My apologies, starting with the wrong word. So these issues are use cases for data fields related to barriers. That one will need some more information from me later on. Then we've got a use case, documenting the IT infrastructure and infrastructure architecture, very important. And then last, the EIF checklist to assess cross-border interoperability effects. What is important here is also in our last webinar, Michael from Poland mentioned, look, we should connect these assessments, these binding requirements to the EIF principles, to the reference architecture, because when we see that that is properly adopted, that gives already a good indication what's the quality of this assessment. But it also makes it a bit more objective to look at an assessment, because it really connects to reference documentation. You can really say, yeah, we follow this reference architecture, this facilitates interoperability. This kind of statement, it carries more weight if we connect it to the reference architecture. Otherwise, it can be considered an opinion. While if you're connecting it to a reference architecture, everybody knows what we're talking about. All the working groups, all the experts have agreed that this kind of approach facilitates interoperability. So that's why that connection is quite important in assessing the quality of an assessment. So that's assessing an assessment. It's always fun to go at this meta level. But I'll circle back to use case number 18, because from the title, you might not really get the full picture. What was identified in use case 18 is I really want to be able to see recurring barriers to interoperability. Currently, the approach that we propose for it, but that is really up to change, that's a very important one for you to give input, is let's link it to EIF and ERA so that we can then filter our assessments on architectural components, link that to the statement, which will be positive or negative, meaning within this building block, we have an issue or we don't have an issue. This would mean that we have done filter on has an issue and then counts for each building block how many assessments identify an issue within it. That will help us identify recurring barriers. It's quite an abstract approach because it's quite hard, just like with the binding requirements, to assign unique identifiers to a barrier. A barrier is a very vague concept. It can be interpreted by many people in a different way. What can be done is at least identify in what areas do we identify such barriers, what areas are problematic. That we want to facilitate by linking to EIF principles and IRA components. This one is more abstract, so I do expect that there might be some questions.
I see Gerard has his hand raised. I don't know if it was from now, it's now, or it was still raised from the, but if you want to react.
It was first still raised and then I raised it again. Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to make I was already writing something in the chat, but regarding IRA, I'm not convinced that IRA in itself is a criterion that proves that you are more interoperable or that your assessment will be better. That I think that assessing interoperability is far more complex and is linked to a lot of to have a good understanding of the whole landscape. But and also IR is not used in many member states and will not be used in many member states because they perhaps use other solutions to achieve similar goals. And also there is no mandate to use IRA anywhere. So I don't think that this can be considered as an element that would make an interoperability assessments as such necessarily better. Or yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
there
Thanks.
Sorry. There is a difference indeed between causation and correlation. So we propose, we don't say that it's the case, that the ones that are using ERA, there has been some thoughts against that architecture, and that could have improved the assessment. We're not saying that that is a requirement for a good assessment, and we're also not saying that that guarantees a good assessment. We're just want to help give an indication, because we have to sort on something. Then when it comes to not all member states are using ERA and even GovERA, it really, that's a pity. But the thing is, it's a reference architecture with agnostic building blocks. So what we hope that would be stimulated a bit as well is for member states to make the connection. Look, this is the building block in our architecture. To what does its map correspond or relate to at European reference architecture level? What we would not want to impose or even consider as a best practice is to everybody just copy paste the architecture. Because what mentioned was before, all the member states have a different administrative setup, which also means that responsibilities within your IT infrastructure rely on different kind of players with different stakeholders and requirements. So just copy pasting a reference architecture is not the smart way to move forward, but we do want to stimulate you to think about what is the connection between this architectural component I'm using here and what is in the reference architecture, just to increase the benefits to the union. Because if we want somebody in Germany who wants inspiration from Denmark on how to implement such matters, and you're both rightfully so within your internal systems talking about what architectural components you're touching on, it's very useful within your country, but it limits the reuse to other countries, because other countries either are not aware or do not have the full comprehensive understanding of the architecture you're using within your member state. If we then all are able to provide at some level a linkage to the reference architecture, we have a common area to work off from, allowing member states to better understand what the other member states are doing when it comes to that. And it's not mandatory, it's just my vision on it and my insight. I do invite other visions and insights so we can improve this, this one.
I'd like to quickly react as well. I also, I mean, I agree that, I mean, there is no obligation on using ERA or anything. Also, it's from my perspective, it's not a core concern of this this vocabulary to take these things into account. It is what is important, I think, is that we have a way of establishing the link between solutions and architecture building blocks as identified in ERA, that we have a way, a canonical way of expressing this. Whether it should be part of the of this model, I'm personally not so convinced, because also the people creating reports in context of the assessment are probably not the people that are part of an enterprise architecture team at the national level that would be the best place to make the linkage between identified solutions and the architectural building blocks in ERA. I do think there is value in making the mapping simply for whenever you're doing an assessment, and you can, when you pick a solution, you know, you can, by having this semantic bridge between solutions and the architecture building block that they implement, you can get a bit into this network of adjacent solutions that might also be interesting to look at in terms of reuse. That's a bit ambitious and long term perhaps, but it would be good if we can establish this link on a more structural level, and consider solutions at the same way as we identify binding requirements in kind of a base registry way, and the CPSV IP assets like public service that we kind of point to them from within this model, that we don't try to reintroduce new entities for solutions either, but that we can more or less point to them. And then this cataloging of solutions according to EIRA, it can probably happen elsewhere, not as part of the assessment process. That's how I look at it at this point. But I mean, if you disagree, we can have a discussion on this point. But it's how I would try to approach it at this moment.
So I see that the two people have spoken with differing opinions. My opinion differs even more. I think that's the ideal point to grab out a tool from the toolbox we can use within webinars, and that is to vote. We're a working group. We're making decisions together. Let's see what we can do. So due to the fact that ERA does not have overall adoption to a level that would really provide full benefit, it might be beneficial to move these use cases to the section we had before, such as for core public service, where we are pointing to something structured, but leave the actual implementation open to member states. So that I would say is option one. Let's leave it out of the model and don't include it explicitly, but we will provide recommendations on how to connect if you want in a structured manner, but we leave it out of the model for now. And option two, we include it explicitly in the model. So that was the initial proposal. So what I want you to do now is within the chat, say for option one, you write one. So option one is, let's leave it out of the model, have some recommendations, keep it implicit, don't make it explicit. Write two if you want it to be explicitly present within the model. I do not have access to the chat due to some login issues, but Sander, I do rely on you to, after the call, tell me which of the two options came out on top. Also, if we wouldn't come to a conclusion within this call, because we don't have enough votes, or you're not certain yet, you don't want to cast your vote, we will leave the discussion open on GitHub for arguments to be provided. As long as no compelling argument is made there that we need to introduce in a following webinar, we will follow the decision that you decide on now in the chat. But if you're not certain about it and you don't want to say it's final, we can also open a discussion in our final session that will be held later this year. So vote, and if you're not certain, flag it on GitHub so that we can still work on fleshing things out, let's say. In the meantime, while you're voting, if you are, because I cannot see, I'll move on to the next part of the model. So these use cases, they all relate to the legal aspect of things. So that means the relation with other legislation, with other policy documents. That means the context under which a policy document was created. So we really want to capture, was it created as a legislative process? Is it just a policy within an organization that introduces some restrictions? Or is this a procurement document? That's context that really matters, because it would not always be beneficial to be comparing how an assessment is performed or what the outcome of an assessment is for your procurement processes compared to really legislation at the national level. For that, I am not a legal expert, but we are very lucky. There does exist a community of legal experts that focuses on semantics and on the structure behind the metadata of legislation. And that's the ELI working group, the European Legislative or Legal Identifier System. And they specialize in these matters. They specialize on what is the relation between documents, what is impacting what type of thing is this. It might even be that some of you are also part of that working group. So there, I'm gonna take propose for me the lazy approach, and that is say, there are some experts over there. Let's use their work. How would that be done within the model? Within the model, we currently have here FRBR expression. FRBR expression, it is related to ELI in some way. And that is because ELI bases a lot of its concepts on FRBR expression. And what I want to introduce as a proposition is to use ELI legal expression next to FRBR expression. I'll first say why legal expression, then I'm going to say why next to. The why legal expression, because it is the ELI equivalent of FRBR expression, so we're not changing the semantics significantly or really restructuring anything. And it is also within ELI very well connected to other legal expressions, other legal concepts. So within ELI, you can make a broad connection, which is science, but you can also say applied by, meaning this legal expression applies the other one. Where does that matter? That's really the cascading bit. That is, there is some European legislation that needs to be reflected within national legislation, and that can then be really structured according to ELI. How to approach this within the model? We limit to including ELI legal expression and leave the connections with other legislation implicit. Why implicit? Because it's very complex. As you all know, legislative matters are complex. You have different levels, different kinds of reuse. And if I were to include all of this within this model, there would be more of the model about that than about actual assessments. It would muddy the waters a bit, and it would just be copy-paste of ELI, because this is what ELI does. Therefore, the proposition is to add ELI legal expression as a class and leave the connections implicit. What does that mean? If you're instantiating the model, so if you're providing the data, you provide the unique identifier of the legal expression. And afterwards, if somebody wants to do an analysis on what is connected, they see your identifier, they go to the authoritative source, where they can then explore the connection with other pieces of legislation. Now, it must be noted, ELI does not cover everything that is in scope of the interoperability assessment. Procurement documents, they are not part of ELI. What is then the intention is to still keep using FRBR expression for those elements that do not have an ELI-related identifier. But there's, because then we're talking about many different systems, we leave the door very wide open because we cannot do this exercise, copy-paste a similar class with a similar structure for any type of structure. So there we leave it open. We say FRBR expression, and then it's implicit in the origins of FRBR expression, what the context is. A lot of talk from my side, a lot of vague talk from my side. So I do welcome some questions and some concerns, so we can clear this matter out. Okay. Either I'm so confusing that you cannot even ask questions, or it's clear. If it's still too confusing, I'm going to say the same thing I've been saying the whole session. GitHub is your best friend. It's a direct line of contact with us, and that's where we can still provide any feedback. If you want to have a think about it, how would this look within my system? Maybe you're not fully aware and you have to talk to someone. You can still post on GitHub and help us improve. What with this proposition we're trying to do is we introduce this structure without imposing it. That's why FRBR expression is still present in the model to make sure we're not imposing ELI on matters that you do not want to use ELI for, or that are not covered by ELI. Sander, I see messages popping in, but I cannot read text. So anything important that we have to act on now?
No, just support for using ELI in referencing legislation.
Okay, that's good. So you've got some ELI fans or even ELI working group members in the chat. That's good to see. Voila. So this is the end of all the issues. If you did not ask any questions because you were afraid we would be going over time, now is the moment. We are ahead of schedule. We have enough time to answer your questions. So if you want to come back on one of the issues mentioned before, or even talk about something new, now is the time. Sander, Isa, you are also in this call and very involved with what we're doing today. Are there any concerns you've seen or now realized during our presentation you want to talk about?
Yes, I'm a bit in because we on the previous issue around ERA, I wonder if everything. I mean, if we got enough, if we provided enough context for people to vote on the issue. Maybe it wasn't exactly clear what we intend with the two options. But maybe I see that Isa, please do interrupt.
Yes,
me.
I have the same feeling that this is something that needs to be somehow further discussed. And you can also see in the study that Sander has shared in the beginning of this of the meeting, this final report on this supporting study that we did for interoperability assessments, that there have been ideas around using ERA for the ERA logic more than ERA itself to do the assessments. And I think, but this is, I think, an idea that will most probably be further developed over the coming months. So I have also a tendency that I think keeping it out here because it needs to still be further developed, and there is a really high dependency also on the work on the future EIF that is also has started now. And so, yeah, I just fear if we make the more complex we make the model, the less, the harder it is to discuss. And the ERA controlled vocabulary is quite complex also with new terms. But now I'm just giving my own opinion. But as I see, there is no strong opinion, at least today, from people. But if anybody is in the call that has a strong say and say, but this is something we're using, it would be useful, then for me it would also be interesting. Maybe it doesn't have to be all the controlled vocabulary, but there are certain specificities that would make sense as categorization to already include in the model. But then let's try to be specific and not put a long list of another 200 items, but can we extract 4 interesting items, or I don't know. But it's also a question really to you, to the crowd that is here, and to those maybe that have also put the point in the GitHub.
I see some raised hands. Gerard, please go ahead.
Yeah, just to come back on IRA, I think it is something different to use the IRA controlled vocabulary. So if I understand that correctly, so the list or the way of classifying information systems or other solutions than to use IRA. So, and I understood that what you want to do is basically just using the controlled vocabulary, which doesn't necessarily mean that people would have to use ARIA, but just reusing the controlled vocabulary. And if it is only that, I don't. I would say that it is probably not harming to provide it as an option, as something that people can fill in, but certainly I would not define this as a mandatory field, because it will be quite difficult for many people to make the right choice, because you have to have a knowledge of this controlled vocabulary to be able to know what you are doing. And I'm not sure that that will be easy for, I'm sure that it will not be easy for most of them, but if people are working with it and they know how to classify, it cannot harm. But then I would see it as an optional field that people could use if they want, but don't have to use if they don't know how to use this. Yeah. Mm.
Yes, I think yeah, it's one of those things. It could definitely help in discovery, and also yes, only the controlled vocabulary. I mean, at least from my perspective, I wouldn't go beyond the controlled vocabulary for classifying solutions. Otherwise, it becomes how do you where to start, you know. And the architecture building blocks could provide some structure in classifying things. That's really the objective of at least being able to cluster solutions into common themes. And but then if we have a way, whether we do it in the model or we make a separate way of classifying solutions according to ERA, personally, I lean a bit more towards having a way outside of this model to be able to classify solutions according to ERA, just because of the different moments of instantiation. It will most likely be a different team doing the classification of solutions, rather than either the owner of the solution or the one who is filling out an assessment report. So I see it more as something that is being done, that gets done by either a team at the national level, or even the ERA team might provide some capacity to classify reusable solutions according to ERA. So yes, I think we agree on this aspect, and to be further cleared out, and then
yeah. So what I noted down now is to include it, but as an optional, very soft addition to the model, not a mandatory part, definitely not go beyond the controlled vocabulary, but also to keep the conversation going on GitHub, because I think maybe other people from the organization want to chime in on this one. But definitely lightweight and as a reference.
I think we also shouldn't over exaggerate the impact that this has. It is a very interesting, nice to have, but it doesn't impact the core necessity of having the reporting in place in any way. So it can lead to some enhanced discovery in reuse of solutions. But also, I don't think it is that important to reach consensus on this now. We can definitely continue the conversation a bit longer in GitHub and then reach consensus at a later point.
So I will now be moving on to the end of the webinar, except if somebody raises his hand to either still comment on ERA or comment on one of the other use cases we addressed today. So stop me if you want to. You don't have to raise your hand either. You can just speak up, be a rebel. So what has been the process we have been doing and what still needs to be done? So what have we done? On the 9th of April, we've done an introductory webinar to get you a bit more familiar with the model, explain to you what are our intentions with what's in the model. All the output from that webinar is available on JoinUp under the SEMIC page. So the SEMIC Support Center has an events page where you can really go look at what have we done in the past, what has been the outcomes, look at the recordings as well. That's always nice. Then between that session and the following session, we try to gather more input. But we saw, let's talk about this because we needed to be more concrete and get more input. So our first working session, we really came together to talk about what are our use cases, what are our needs, what do we see as additional benefits beyond what is legally required. Because that's really what we're doing. If we're trying to just do the legal required bits, copy paste legislation and we're done, no, we want to really make sure that there is actually some reusable value in those assessment reports, that the intention of the legislation is met and not only the letter of the legislation. Then between that moment and now, we updated the use cases on GitHub, asked for your input there, but also added some use cases stemming from other reports that are talking about assessments. And then today we went over all the use cases, proposed some solutions for some, moved some to other teams, but that does not mean the story is done, that the story is closed. We still leave all the use cases open for discussions on GitHub. We will label them so you see what is what, how is how. And between that, now, the 5th of June and the 10th of July, we really want you to do the final push. After the 10th of July, we are not intending to make significant changes to the model anymore. Why? Because we want to allow implementers of the data model to work with something stable. So really now is your final chance between the 5th of June and the 10th of July to provide your input on what needs to happen and what needs to change. Then on the 10th of July or later, depending on the availability, we will have a closing webinar where we go over what have we done to meet what needs, what have you decided during the webinars and in the interim period, so we can wrap up this data model, put a bow on it, and give it to our implementation teams to really reap the benefits, start reaping the benefits from it. Of course, after the 10th of July, you won't be able to go to JoinUp the day after and see, oh, it's already here, everything is working. There is, of course, a period for implementation that will follow. And yeah, maybe we can even get some insights on what the roadmap beyond the data model is, but I cannot promise that part yet. And then we have some next steps that don't really require you to engage, and that is block your agenda for the 10th of July from 10 to 12. That's when we currently intend to have the webinar. But do also keep an eye on your mailbox because it's in more than a month. Things might happen and things can change. Maybe you provide so much input, we need more time to handle it. there are some variables. So also keep your eyes peeled on whether it will change, but already block your agenda, please. And then really go on GitHub, tackle. This is your last chance this period. Tackle those issues. Answer questions somebody else asks so that we can have full perspectives on matters. Add new use cases. Maybe a new use case pops up that's so important. But do know, if you post a new use case, to monitor it, because most of the discussions will happen online, because we only have one more webinar planned. With that having been said, 10 minutes before end time, woohoo! I want to thank you all for joining the call today. I hope that this is going in the direction you wanted, and if not, GitHub. I've said GitHub a million times today, and that's for a reason. So thank you very much for attending this one and the previous ones, and hopefully thank you for attending the next webinar. Sander, you any closing remarks?
No, yes, thank you all, and we'll see each other in the next webinar. Have a pleasant further day, part of the day.